This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, I'm Maureen Bogey.
And I'm Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
That is right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to have a gosh darn blast to be kept up to date on all the things we're thinking about doing.
That's right.
Feel free to check us out on Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod.
Woo!
We're on Facebook, and on our Facebook, we have a subgroup called Citizens of the Milky Way. Feel free to check that out.
Please do. That's where daily we interact with the listeners. We
Yes.
post cool articles, funny memes, just tell funny stories. We also let everyone know ahead of time what the next episode's going to be. So if you like to, if you want to be on the inside, go find that. It's on Facebook, Citizens of the Milky Way. Anyone can join. Just click the whatever, and one of us will let you in.
That is correct. Also, please feel free to like, rate, subscribe.
Oh, yeah.
Tell a friend about the show. It really does help, and we are very grateful for all of your help.
Uh-huh.
But if one episode a week is just not enough for you.
And it's not. It never is.
It never is. It never effing is. So you need some more Creep Street. But don't freak out, you guys. We have a really great solution to your problem.
Oh, yeah.
We have tons of bonus content up on our Patreon page. Head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. And there you will see we have 3 different tiers.
Oh, yes.
$2, $5, and $10 a month. And on each of those tiers, we offer some great bonus content that we know that you Creep Streets just love.
Oh my God, you just can't get enough of it. And you know what I can't get enough of?
What?
Reading off the names of our top tier Patreon subscribers.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bone Breaker Bex Martin, the notorious Nicholas Barker, the terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Leviathan Levi Mace, and the loathsome Johnny Love.
Thank you so much for that, Dylan. That was righteous and true.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Quick update for everyone. Jessica Jones' book, the upcoming book we're all very, very excited about, called The Untouchable Jessica Jones, is available for pre-order. I believe it's pre-order, the Kindle version on Amazon, but then if you go to her Instagram page directly, or you'd go directly to the Untouchable Jessica Jones website, there you can pre-order the actual hard copy of the book if you're interested.
And it was already an Amazon bestseller.
Yes.
Like the day it went up.
That is right. And Jessica Jones, she is the woman we interviewed a couple episodes back. She was the NXIVM survivor and whistleblower. So grateful to have had her on the podcast. We're just so excited now that the book, the pre-order is out.
Ooh.
So we know that it's coming up quick, and then we'll get to have her back on.
We're going to sink our teeth into that book, much like the subject of today's episode would.
What do you mean? What the fuck are you fucking talking about?
I'm talking about today's subject.
I'm so annoyed. What is it?
Today we are talking about the vampires of New England.
Oh my gosh, that's actually really, really spooky, scary, and now I get the teeth sunk into reference, and I think now I'm okay with it.
This is our first vampire story.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
I mean, vampires have been mentioned, but like this is going to be the first one dedicated to vampiric lore.
Exactly, because we did Elizabeth Bathory, but she's not really a vampire, as it were. This is where we're really getting into it, so I'm excited.
Well, just real quick, I'll give you my sources. I've got a few of them here. Well, the first source is a book I read called Food for the Dead, On the Trail of New England's Vampires by Michael E. Bell. Then an article called The Great New England Vampire Panic by Abigail Tucker at Smithsonian Magazine. And then The New England Vampire Panic by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe, and The Vampires of Rhode Island at advocado.org.
So there you go.
There you go. Those are my sources. Let me tell you something. I'm very excited about today's story because it's creepy as hell, but it's also a little slice of history that kind of gets overshadowed. For example, we all know about the witch trials, right? The great
the
witch
Salem
scare.
witch trials.
Yeah.
Yes.
The great witch panic that took part in the latter 1600s. Well,
so not just Salem, just all over New
right,
England.
the Northeast,
yes.
right, not just Salem, but that was kind of the epicenter, but yeah, all over the Northeast. Well, 200 years later, the Northeast of the United States would be gripped by another panic, a vampire panic.
Yikes.
And a lot of the action happened right there in Rhode Island and Connecticut.
Wow, okay, damn. New England is so cool. There's really nowhere like it. It's just got this lore steeped in its freaking soil.
It sure does. There have been several exhumed graves in New England that have shown signs that folks believed the person in the coffin was a vampire. The person who, the first story we're going to talk about, and it's kind of the quintessential American vampires,
right,
is that of Mercy Lena Brown. She was probably the last person in the U.S. who was exhumed posthumously for suspicion of vampirism.
Okay,
but she's also kind of gone on to be the face of the American vampire.
Yes, definitely. Okay.
It's a fascinating story. It took place in the tiny town of Exeter, Rhode Island.
Oh, very nice, pretty.
So, just to paint you a little picture of Exeter, Rhode Island during the late 19th century, things were not great.
Oh, no.
For example, in 1820, the population of Exeter was estimated to be over 2,500 people, so a tiny town. But by 1892, the year that Mercy Brown died, the population had shrunk to 961 people.
Oh my God.
Now, this was due to a number of things. The Civil War had happened just a few decades earlier, which had done a lot, to thin out the population.
Right.
Likewise, there was the birth of industrialization and the whole railroad system. A lot of folks were leaving town to other parts of the country to find work. But perhaps the biggest reason of all was tuberculosis.
Yes.
TB began to hit New England hard starting in about the 1730s, but it was at its worst in the 1800s. And it even became the leading cause of death in New England at the time.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
And of course, not long after the arrival of TB, vampire panics usually followed suit.
Interesting.
Now, by all accounts, large parts of Exeter, Rhode Island began to look like a ghost town by the late 1800s, littered with abandoned homes and farms. Apparently even got to the point where the U.S. government began to seize and just burn down abandoned properties because they were just like, so many of them that they were just taking up land that they would just seize the land and just kind of clear it out. So either the government could use it or they could people could buy it and actually do something with it.
Right.
So TB, when someone had TB, oftentimes it would take years until that person actually died. So when you consider the symptoms of the illness, it's no surprise that, especially in that era, when you didn't know a lot about tuberculosis,
right,
when all of a sudden all of their loved ones around them are like weakening and dying,
right,
it's no surprise people might start to think they're under the influence of like supernatural forces, whether it's vampires or just God hates them.
Right,
you know, you're going to start to wonder like, what the fuck?
Because it literally looks like the life is being drained out of them. It
really does.
Like it's like this slow progression of like just kind of looking dead.
Exactly.
Honestly.
You think about it, the fatigue, bloody cough, just the literal look of wasting away.
Really pale and like blood on the corner of your mouth.
Exactly.
Sometimes, yeah.
To quote my source directly,
the emaciated figure strikes one with terror, the forehead covered with drops of sweat, the cheeks painted with a livid crimson, the eyes sunk, the breath offensive, quick, and laborious, and the cough so incessant as to scarce allow the wretched sufferer time to tell his complaints. It progressed in such a way that it seemed like something was draining the life and blood out of somebody.
Kind of what we just said. Literally, it sounds like a vampire attack without the vampire.
Right. Damn. And that makes you think maybe this is more of a, like, invisible force.
Right.
That's doing it. Like, maybe vampires can do that, you know?
Right. This was something I didn't know. The actual bacterium of tuberculosis had only recently been discovered in 1882, 10 years before Mercy Brown died. So it's not surprising that folks living in a rural, isolated area hadn't heard about that yet, these scientific, the reasoning behind all of these things. Now, we knew, it's not like we thought it was supernatural up until 1882.
Right.
People knew that it was some sort of an illness, but they didn't know what it was, or so of course
they called it consumption.
Consumption, right? So of course your mind, it's just natural, the natural human condition. We fill in the blanks with other things,
right? And also consumption was kind of one of those things that it was like it was TB, but it was also kind of just like general kind of like you're sick and dying.
Exactly.
So they just would kind of like throw consumption out there because they didn't, like Dylan's saying, like they knew that this was like an illness, but they didn't know exactly what it was and like how it worked and what it was exactly doing.
Right.
A side note, any person that's into theater probably knows about consumption because it is mentioned in every goddamn
fucking play
I've ever read in my life. When I was in college, I went to Syracuse University. I was a acting major there, and one semester I was in this Russian play called The Lower Depths. It was a 3-act play. It was so incredibly long, and I died in the first act, halfway through the first act, but no one notices, so I literally had to just lay there motionless as if I was dead for about 30 minutes on stage. It was wild. It was kind of a wild time. I slept on stage sometimes, and sometimes I'd look out into the audience, and the audience was sometimes asleep. One time somebody brought a blanket with them with the intention to fall asleep, and I thought...
There you go.
Anyway, so I did die of consumption on stage one time. It was relaxing.
Anything for her craft.
Anything.
And also, actual effective treatments for tuberculosis didn't come around until the 1940s, which is something I didn't know either. So back then in Mercy Brown's day, if medical personnel didn't outright tell you that there was nothing they can do, you might have been prescribed some wacky methods of treatment. Like in Mercy Brown's day, it wasn't uncommon that someone with TB might be prescribed drinking brown sugar mixed with water. Or going on frequent horseback rides. Things like that.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like they just thought like, oh, you know, being out in fresh air or whatever. And it's like, maybe don't ride a horse right now.
Yeah.
But, you know, they were trying.
Well, the Brown family lived on the eastern edge of the town of Exeter. The source says they lived in what was a modest home with about 30 of 40 acres of land. Now, it was December of 1882, when Mercy was at the age of 9, that the plague of TB first came to her family.
Oh, no.
Mercy's mother, Mary Eliza, was the first to pass with the affliction. Just a few months later, in 1883, Mercy's 20-year-old sister, who worked as a dressmaker, Mary Oliver, so there's 2 Marys, she succumbed to TB as well. The obituary in the local paper read this:
"The last few hours she lived was of great suffering, yet her faith was firm, and she was ready for the change."
And apparently the whole town turned up for the funeral, and they sang her favorite hymn, "One Sweetly Solemn Thought." That's what the article said. So, bummer. So within
sad.
a few months, 2 members of the family, the mother and her sister, are gone.
Oh my God.
From TB. A few years later, Mercy Brown's brother, Edwin, who worked as a store clerk, became sick with TB. Now, he was sent to Colorado Springs as a hope that this change in climate might help him beat his illness. That's something we've talked about.
Yes,
how people, that was kind of a thing. You'd go to, we talked about it with King Tut. Often, like, the wealthy citizens in the UK would send people down to, like, Cairo for the dry, if they were sick, shit like that. So, kind of in the lines of that, you know.
Annalise Michel did that
Exactly.
too.
While he was away, Mercy also came down with TB.
Oh, God.
And her case was what is described as galloping TB, meaning she may have had it for years and was asymptomatic. But once she did start to show signs of illness, it was very rapid. So she had a
Gotcha.
very rapid decline. The doctors told Mercy's father that there was nothing they could do to help Mercy and that she would soon pass away as well. Likewise, in Colorado, Edwin had gone through a bit of a remission, but took a turn for the worst, and it looked like Edwin wasn't going to live as well.
Oh my God, this family.
So they sent Edwin home so he could be with his family as he passed as well.
Oh my God.
In January of 1892, Mercy Lena Brown passed away, leaving behind her father and brother Edwin. So just think about the shit this family has just been handed.
My God.
I mean, and all of the same, just awful.
So terrible. For the dad of the family, that is so god awful.
Well, of course, the town was heartbroken for the Brown family. They had lost nearly the whole family, and it obviously didn't look good for Edwin.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the townsfolk had likewise grown fearful that something else may be plaguing the Brown family. Rumors began to circulate of people having sighted the recently deceased Mercy Brown wandering through the cemetery and through farmland.
Mercy.
The townspeople started to believe that a vampire had slowly been draining the life of the family for the last decade, and were likewise turning the family themselves into vampires.
Oh, fuck.
Well, the townspeople had approached George Brown about it, the father.
Yeah.
From what I understand, he at first didn't want to buy into all that, but eventually relented for the sake of his son. Because let's think about it. You lose your family of 5 and you've lost 3. Probably at this point you're thinking, Jesus, even if it isn't vampire shit, like what else? What do I have to lose?
Exactly. He's like, I'm willing to try anything. At this point, you might as well just fucking throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
And of course, they're just going, at the moment, just going to exhume the bodies to see them. They're not planning to
do anything
yet, unless there's signs that they are a vampire. If they open them up and they're fine, they'll just put them back. And
right.
It'd be one thing if they were like, let's go in, open up those graves and desecrate those corpses. That would be probably, but so you can't really blame this guy maybe for wondering why something's fucking with his family. So.
Right. I mean, wanting to at least, maybe there's a chance this can save his son.
So he agrees to have the bodies checked for a sign of vampirism. Well, on March 17th, 1892, a group of villagers, including the town doctor and a local newspaper reporter, headed to the cemetery. They needed to know who the vampire was, so they actually dug up all 3 of the Brown family. They dug up Mary Eliza, Mary Oliver, and Mercy. There was nothing to note when it came to the bodies of Mary Eliza and Mary Oliver. Both showed the appropriate amount of decomposition that you would expect for the amount of time they had been passed away. But as they opened the coffin of Mercy Brown, the group was stunned. Apparently, according to the legend, Mercy's body showed hardly any signs of decomposition at all. In fact, witnesses would claim to even see a bit of rosiness in her cheeks. Most shocking of all, though, was that it appeared Mercy's body had changed positions. Some say that she had actually rolled over.
Yeah.
The doctor examined the bodies and the organs and found that there was fresh blood in Mercy's heart.
What?
Now, in the minds of the people of Exeter, this was all the proof they needed. Mercy's heart and liver were removed from her body and burned to ash. The ashes were mixed with water and given to Edwin as a sort of tonic.
Oh my God.
And that was supposed to help him recover, but Edwin would die anyway 2 months later.
They thought that would heal him?
Yeah.
That was the idea?
Yep, and 2 months later he passed. The remains of Mercy Brown were reburied at the cemetery of the Baptist Church there in Exeter. Here's an interesting thing that I didn't know about. Of course, the legend of Mercy Brown spread very quickly after she died in 1892. Well, only 5 years later, in 1897, Bram Stoker would publish his magnum opus Dracula. And as most people probably know, the character Count Dracula is based heavily on Vlad Dracula or Vlad the Impaler. Mm-hmm. Well, it's thought that in the years before publishing Dracula, as Stoker was working as a stage manager in London, he had heard the tale of Mercy Brown and it influenced the character Lucy.
Oh.
The friend of Mina who becomes a vampire. Mercy, her middle name was Lena. Apparently no one called her Mercy. Everyone called her Lena, her friends, her family.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of the sources refer to her as Lena rather than Mercy too.
Okay.
So it's very possible that Bram Stoker heard this legend of Lena Brown and just used the name Lucy because the way they're described is very similar.
No, that I never put that together, but that makes a lot of sense. Oh, that's interesting.
So here's an excerpt from the newspaper article that was written by that reporter who was in attendance.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that Dr. Metcalf attended Mercy Lena Brown during her last illness, and that a short time prior to her death, he informed her father that further medical aid was useless, as the daughter, a girl of 18 or 19, was in the last stages of consumption. The doctor had heard nothing further from the family until about a year ago, when a man called on him and stated that Edwin A. Brown, a son, was in a dying condition from the same disease, and that several friends and neighbors fully believed the only way in which his life could be saved was to have the bodies of the mother and the daughters exhumed in order to ascertain if the heart in any of the bodies still contained blood, as these friends were fully convinced that if such were the case, the dead body was living on the living tissue and blood of Edwin. The doctor sent the young man back, telling him the belief was absurd. Last Wednesday, the man returned and told the doctor that Mr. Brown, the father, though not believing the superstition himself, desired him to come up to satisfy the neighbors and make an autopsy of the bodies. On Wednesday morning, March 17th, therefore, the doctor went as desired to what is known as Shrub Hill Cemetery in Exeter, and found 4 men who had unearthed the remains of Mrs. Brown, who had been interred for 9 years. Some of the muscles and flesh still existed in a mummified state, but there were no signs of blood in the heart. The body of the first daughter, Mary Oliver, was then taken out of the grave, but only a skeleton with a thick growth of hair remained. Finally, the body of Mercy Lena, the second daughter, was removed from the tomb, where it had been placed till spring. The body was in a fairly well-preserved state. It had been buried 2 months. The heart and liver were removed, and in cutting open the heart, clotted and decomposed blood was found, which was what might be expected at that stage of decomposition. The liver showed no blood, though it was in a well-preserved state. These 2 organs were removed, and a fire being kindled in the cemetery, they were reduced to ashes, and the attendants seemed satisfied. The lungs showed diffuse tuberculosis germs. The old superstitions of the natives of Exeter, and also believed in other farming communities. The belief is that so long as the heart contains blood, so long will any of the immediate family who are suffering from consumption continue to grow worse. But if the heart is burned, that the patient will get better. And to make the cure certain, the ashes of the heart and liver should be eaten by the person afflicted. In this case, the doctor does not know if this latter remedy was resorted to or not, and he only knows from hearsay how ill the son Edwin is, never having been called to attend him.
So this paints a slightly different picture.
Interesting.
You know, it did state that the body did seem well preserved.
Yes.
It did say that. It didn't get into the more frenzied descriptions that some people get. This obviously, it paints a slightly more muted picture of the story. Still weird, like she was preserved, but he didn't freak out.
No.
And he said it was more done as a way to appease the locals.
Right.
So that was kind of interesting. But there's also a theory for a natural reason why maybe her body didn't show much signs of decomposition. Mm-hmm. See, Mercy had died in January and was laid to rest in an above-ground crypt. So consider from January to March 17th when they exhumed her body, it would have been like keeping her in a freezer.
Right, it was cold, yeah. Yeah, she was kept above ground, for a while because the ground was so frozen solid they couldn't even bury her for a while.
Right.
So that does make sense. The weather, how it being so cold, that does make sense.
As we said, Mercy was probably the last person exhumed in the U.S. under the suspicion of vampirism, but vampire panics were not necessarily new to New England. For example, in the year 1990, in the town of Griswold, Connecticut, a group of kids were playing on a hillside near an old gravel mine when they stumbled upon some graves. Well, one of the kids ran home and told their mom, and at first the mom was skeptical until one of the kids showed her a skull.
Oh my God.
So remember, this is 1990, so they call the authorities. At first, the authorities thought they might have found some victims of a prominent serial killer at the time, Michael Ross.
Oh.
But it didn't take them long to realize that when they saw the bones and everything in the burial, that these graves were 100, 200 years old.
Right.
So after some excavating, they found that the hillside was actually once a colonial-era cemetery. There were 29 bodies buried in all, most of them children. All of them had been fit in the description of how colonial era burials were. They were simple wooden coffins, no jewelry, not a lot of clothing, arms placed either at their sides or their chest, except for one, that is. Burial plot number 4 stood out from the rest. It was one of only 2 stone crypts in the cemetery. When the archaeologists brushed away the earth that was on top of it until they got to the stone lid, they removed it. And inside they found a coffin painted red, as well the remains of skeletal feet that were resting where the feet usually would in the coffin. But as they removed more of the covering, they realized everything else about the body had been completely rearranged.
What?
The skull had been removed from the body. The thigh bones lay across the rib cage in an X with the skull on top of them, almost exactly like the Jolly Roger flag, the skull and crossbones.
Yes.
Analysis was able to determine that the beheading of the other injuries happened 5 years after the person died.
What?
And that the red coffin had likewise been smashed open, indicating the folks thought this person was a fucking vampire.
Wow.
And these burials were from the 1700s.
That is fascinating.
Fascinating, right? And it happened 5 years after they died.
Oh my God, that is so interesting. I wonder, like, what they thought they were doing, making that skull and crossbones. If that,
right?
I don't know. If anyone knows more about what that might mean, let us know.
Well, if you haven't noticed already, the common theme here is first comes tuberculosis and then vampire panics. In 1817, in South Woodstock, Vermont, there was a 20-year-old student at Dartmouth University named Frederick Ransom. He passed away with TB, and after he did, it wasn't long till his friends and family, people that were close to him, started to grow sick and die as well.
Yeah.
Well, people began to suspect Frederick of being a vampire. Posthumously, his heart was cut out and apparently burned in a blacksmith's forge. But vampire or not, all the people that had grown sick still died anyway.
Wow.
This one's wild. This one's freaky. This one chilled me a little bit. In 1889, a 19-year-old living in West Greenwich, Rhode Island, named Nellie Vaughn, came down with a bad case of pneumonia and died of a severe fever. Well, first she was buried at home, but after some time, her mother allowed for permission for her to get buried at the local Baptist church. So they transferred her there. She was buried. The legend goes that on the very night she was buried at the church, a man was passing through the graveyard when he heard the sound of a woman screaming from within one of the graves.
Stop.
But he couldn't tell from which grave it was coming from. Every time he'd think he'd get close, it would sound like it was coming. So nevertheless, this just totally shook him.
My heart feels like, oh, that's so scary.
He returned the very next morning with a constable. They discovered fresh footprints of a woman around the grave of Nellie Vaughn. Now, in Nellie's case, though, her grave was never exhumed, but people did suspect her of being a vampire. Apparently, her grave would often be vandalized in the coming years because people,
right.
Many wondered if Nellie may have been prematurely laid to rest and was buried alive.
Yes.
According to the legend, grass will not grow on Nellie's grave to this very day.
Oh my God.
But it gets freakier.
Oh, because that was a thing that would happen, not like all the time, but it did happen during the 1800s and before, but like where people would be accidentally buried alive. That really actually happened.
Yeah, they would put bells on the,
Yeah, that's where the term "saved by the bell" comes from.
That's right.
You pull the bell thing from your coffin.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yes. You're right. Well, this graveyard, Nellie apparently is very active. These stories freak me out. So there's other stories about Nellie as well that still happen in modern times. Legend has it that once a woman was in the West Greenwich Baptist Church, where Nellie's buried, in the cemetery part. And there she was doing what they call grave rubbings, which is where you take the paper and either charcoal or chalk and you just rub it on the surface and you can like kind of make a copy of the, especially with those old gravestones that have kind of worn away and stuff like that.
Actually had to do that for theater school and college too, at the very spooky, scary cemetery right there.
Yeah. She found that Nellie Vaughn's grave, the tombstone, was wet. Like, even though it hadn't rained, none of the other, but it was like wet. She couldn't put the paper on it because it ruined the paper. She thought that was rather odd. When she looked up, she saw a young woman dressed in what the source describes as archaic dress, so out of place, probably older looking. The woman looked at her and said, "I am happy." but the face of this woman looked anything but. She looked distraught and sad. The woman knelt down in front of the grave and said,
I am happy.
before breaking into a sob. The other woman asked her if she needed help. She only responded,
I am happy.
The woman was kind of shaken by this, so she decided to leave. She's walking back to her car, and when she looks back, the mysterious young woman was gone.
Oh my God.
We got more.
Okay, fuck.
Apparently, one time a man was visiting the cemetery to find a grave of an old ancestor when he spotted a young woman sitting on top of one of the tombstones. You know, he thought that was kind of odd, especially because these are old.
Yeah.
People would tell you, hey, get the hell out, especially these old ones. Like,
Right, yeah.
It's like, God, these things, some of these are like, you're
It's
going
like it's gonna fucking crumble.
Right. But, on his bed, he didn't want to start anything, so he just walked by, and as he passed her, he gave her a friendly nod. And apparently that's when the young woman said,
I'm perfectly pleasant.
What the fuck?
he thought that was weird, and he turned back around to address her, and when he did, she was gone.
Oh my God. What is the deal with her saying, like, I'm happy, I'm pleasant, what is this?
I don't know. Ready for more?
Oh. Mm-hmm.
One time, another woman was visiting the cemetery when she noticed a woman dancing on an area of the graveyard, kind of in a separate part of the cemetery. She was dancing.
Weird.
She thought that was weird, so she went up to say hello, and of course, when she got there, she was gone.
What?
Later on, after she had done whatever she was there to do, she was leaving and walking back to her car when she saw the woman dancing again in another part of the cemetery.
Wow.
She didn't worry about it, but when she went back later and looked, each area where she saw this woman dancing, no vegetation grew. It was like a bare patch.
Weird. Oh my God. Is she a fucking vampire? Oh my God. Wow. That's so spooky.
There was another time
Oh, come on.
when another woman was visiting the cemetery and they overheard someone grieving, as you might at a cemetery.
Oh, yeah.
They kind of looked over and they saw a young woman on her knees in front of one of the graves. Her hands were covering her face and she was really grieving, sobbing. This woman was kind of concerned and she just asked, is there anything I can do? Are you okay? While still covering her face, the woman said,
I'm perfectly pleasant.
What the fuck?
and she just kept crying. And the woman asked her again, do you need help? And the woman, still sobbing, but still covering her face, said,
Why don't you see that I'm nice? I'm happy.
Huh.
the woman asked her where she was from, and it said the sobbing woman pointed at one of the graves and vanished.
Oh my God. That is fucking scary as shit.
Another time.
What?
I got another one for you.
Oh, come on.
Another time, a young couple decided to go for a walk through the cemetery. And as they approached the cemetery gates, they saw a young woman wearing what they described as an older-looking dress, standing by the gates, almost as if she was standing guard in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they went to enter the gates into the cemetery, and the woman just said,
I am happy.
they kind of thought, that's weird. They tried to walk through the gate again, and that's when the woman said with a growl,
I am happy.
the young couple ran like hell away.
What is going on?
It's said that to this day, on nights when the moon shines bright, you can see a woman sitting on one of the tombstones, saying that she's not a monster, that she's happy and most pleasant. And apparently one of the few things still readable, because Nellie's tombstone's quite old,
Right.
one of the few things still readable on the face of the tombstone are the words, I am waiting and watching for you.
What?
How wild is that?
That is so crazy. I mean, so what do you think, like, her being, the fact that she's crying, but she's saying she's perfectly pleasant, like,
That's
I wonder what that is.
Yeah. And if this is even Nellie, maybe this is someone,
Yeah.
a grave that's just nearby Nellie, and we just associate it with Nellie because of her legend. You know what I mean?
Right. Wow, that is so crazy.
But like all things, obviously I'm sure tuberculosis was to blame for a lot of these vampire panics. But
Totally, yeah.
it would make sense if you were a vampire, what a better place to hide than in the
yeah.
middle of a TB panic.
I mean, absolutely. It's like the perfect place for you to be working. Wow, that is crazy. And like so much of it too, I think like, and we talked about this a little bit in our H.H. Holmes episode, but
Right.
like up until kind of the like early 1900s, medicine was very different. Like to be a doctor, you kind of just decided you were a doctor.
Absolutely.
And then you kind of just like were. So there wasn't like a ton of solid information and the equal amount of information
Right.
everywhere you go. Like I think with Mercy Brown, it is kind of like, you know, it was really cold when she died, so that like preserved her, and then in
Right.
her heart the blood was kind of like congealed and decomposing, but I think maybe to someone who didn't know what you were looking at, it did look like it was still fresh blood.
Right.
And things like that. And like her hair did grow and her nails did grow, which is normal, which is going to happen when a body dies. So it's like she, you know, it seems like it was pretty much just, you know, TB. She was not like,
Right.
was not a vampire. But like you said, Dylan, and like we've said many times in many episodes, just because one thing can be explained or
Exactly.
one instance can be explained, does that mean that there's nothing to any of it? I don't know.
Right.
Maybe there were just vampires out there grinding.
That's right.
In the 1800s. I haven't read this book in probably 11 years, but I remember reading Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter
Oh, yeah.
and thinking, like, maybe this is real.
Maybe this is real.
I was like, I remember talking to my mom about it and then her being like, you understand that this is not real, right? And I was like, kind of. So, I mean, yeah, what a crazy...
Crazy little slice of history that you don't hear a lot about.
Right, you really don't, because, and it's kind of funny that you don't, because you should, because it's so interesting, and also
Yeah.
it's like, it's so spooky too that it was like, oh, there was the witch uproar happening
Exactly.
in, you know, the 1600s, and then vampire uproar happening in the same area.
Yes.
You know, it's like, it's very exciting and fun.
Apparently, the town of Exeter doesn't like to advertise that history.
I don't know why people don't. You gotta go Salem's route. I don't know a lot about it, except there's a very, very fancy prep school there. And
Yeah.
maybe that has something to do with it. But maybe they have a missed opportunity.
That's going to wrap it up for Vampires of New England.
Goodness gracious, Dylan, thank you so much for putting together such a fun episode for us. What a great
Absolutely.
Americana spooky episode
That's
to
great.
have
Yes.
for here during July time.
That's right. 4th of July coming up here in the States. If you're celebrating, be safe, have fun.
Yes.
Once again, if you want to support the show, please like, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, family, share. And of course, if you want to take that extra step and get a little more creep for your street, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast.
Woohoo! We are working on our listener stories or listener
Yes.
personal experiences episode, so feel free to DM us on any social media or email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com with any personal ghost sightings or true crime connections or
Absolutely.
anything like that.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey,
Good night.
and
Goodbye.
bye now.